There's lots of pressure on DMs to fill every second while they're at the table, to paint a picture, to fill the silence, be the wittiest one at the table, or at least the most creative, right? But what is that causing us to miss? What kind of pressure are we putting ourselves in just to say more, to be more? Well, that's what we're going to find out about today, because maybe we don't have to say a lot. Maybe by saying less, we actually end up doing more for our campaign. This is How to Be a Better DM, the show for DMs and DM hopefuls who want to make an impact in their friend group without negatively impacting their mental health or life balance. I'm Tanner Wayland. And honestly, I had this thought because I was looking at this month and we're focusing on performance, one of our 4 pillars of DMing. Performance, I was thinking about the word. It literally means putting on a show, trying to impress. And, my initial thought when I had that, there was a small part of me that was like, man, don't be such a tryhard. That thought kind of popped in my head. And I think there's a little bit of a negative connotation for performance for me in the way that, and this is probably more info than you were looking for, but I kind of realized I was like, oh man, there's part of me that has a distaste for trying to put on a show, trying to impress people, to astound them, to make them think a certain thing about me rather than just being more natural. Now, as I've grown up, because that was very much derived from a much younger Tanner, but as I've grown up, I've come to appreciate performance, showmanship, everything like that. But I do think that there's a truth there about how in all the effort that we put into performing well, there is an aspect of it that's a little trite, a little filler, right? And that sent me down a whole rabbit hole just into the insights about amount or volume of things that we say as DMs. Overcompensating is maybe the closest word that came to my, like the most concise word for what I'm trying to get at. Basically, we have a lot that we need to be prepared for. We have a lot that we need to perform. We have players that have high expectations. They want a fun time. They want to feel like we have everything under control. And with that being said, maybe we fill that expectation gap with excess filler descriptions, with overly meandering conversations as NPCs, with the avoidance of being direct, when being direct would maybe be a little bit scarier, but would get things moving more. So, and honestly, this is the reason I thought of this is because I struggle with it so much, not only as a DM, but in my life. You should see my text exchanges, especially if I'm trying to communicate complex ideas or I want to make sure that there is nothing to be misunderstood. They're freaking novels, and it's something that my wife makes fun of me for, but it's still how I do it. I find a certain value in it, even though it takes a while. But I realized I was like, okay, as far as performance goes as a DM, I think we actually, by learning some brevity, could benefit the overall appearance of what we say and what we add to the campaign. So let's review some observations about brevity in DMing and saying less so that more can happen, and saving ourselves from the need to overly compensate with filler. Observation number 1. When we talk more, others talk less. So recently I've been reading a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of those classic self-improvement books, right? And one of the chapters that I read was about, it's got a kind of a convoluted long title, ironically, but it's like, oh, if he who can do this has the world, and who can't doesn't. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing because once again, it's pretty long. But the gist of the chapter was, if you can show interest in others, that will be more interesting to them than if you talked a lot about yourself. And it's true. I think that the honestly, for me, some of the best conversations I've had where I can tell people enjoyed it the most was when I asked them a lot about themselves. Now, what does this have to do with DMing? Like I said with this observation, when we talk more, others talk less. It's a collaborative game. It's supposed to be collaborative storytelling, and yet we're just one of us, and the players outnumber us, 3, 4, 5 to 1, however many people are at the table, right? And yet sometimes we're doing most of the talking. Isn't that insane? Isn't it a little bit insane, at least, that the expectation is like, oh, the DM kind of takes the lion's share of the talking and the explanations and everything like that, when if you reversed it, it really should be the players talking a lot more, right? Kind of like a thought I gave a few episodes ago, with the Shadow Dark campaign. One of their things is one of their kind of mantras or principle for DMs is to let your players fill in the empty space, right? Essentially, that's a lot of what this idea is like, hey, answer the players directly, unless there's like some really key details that they need to know. Honestly, keep it simple. And same for descriptions, describe what's immediately in front and keep it short, sweet, and to the point. Don't feel like you have to say a lot. Instead, keep it short and then turn the question back on the players. Get them going. Get them talking about it. And in many ways, you need to let their actions fill the void rather than you doing the same. There is another, that while that's important, if you find that the players themselves are kind of dithering and not really getting somewhere, then you can still be, brief, but be like, okay, while you guys are talking, it goes to nighttime. Something like that. You can move the story along in ways that don't just involve you like talking it out a whole lot with them. By just basically giving them space to talk and take part and create the world around them, then you're probably making a more fun game for them in general. Now, observation number 2, we need to learn to think through discomfort and uncertainty. And that also means we need to learn how to sit with the discomfort and uncertainty and in the quiet, right? Teachers do very well at this, or some teachers do, where like the really good ones, they'll ask a question and they won't wait just the 5 to 10 seconds that most of us feel comfortable waiting for. They will actually start, they'll just keep looking around until they notice someone and then maybe call that person out, or they'll just keep looking around. And then maybe if it's been like a good 20 seconds, they'll be like, let me rephrase the question. They might prompt again, but they won't just supply the answer because things are awkward, right? And that's absolutely true as DMs, right? If someone, let's say that a player asks a question, they're like, okay, let's assume they're in a dungeon, a little bit of a puzzle scenario, or they're just in a room, and you know how players get, where they're just like, oh, there's got to be something here, and they're just spending forever on this room. Some DMs, and I don't think this is wrong all the time, as I'll kind of mention at the end here, but some DMs will be like, okay, let's move them along. Let's keep giving them info. Let's kind of point them to the different points of interest. Whereas I think you'd make it easier on yourself if you just said, you're in a small 20 by 20 room. There's a cot in the corner and dust on the floor. What do? Just keep it simple. They can ask further questions. And let's say that they say, okay, I look under the bed can I roll perception? And then you're like, sure. They roll perception. They roll well. And you're like, you look under bed. Doesn't appear to be anything. You don't need to say anything else, right? And some of you do really well with this. And I think everyone has moments like that. Like a dungeon, specifically if people are searching for things, it's a little bit easier to be quiet about it. But maybe if it's more of a role-playing scenario, or they're in a city where there's a lot of things they could do, and you want to lead the adventure, it's easy to oversupply details rather than kind of letting them steer things and say things and prompt you. Now, as part of the, learning to sit in the discomfort and uncertainty, I think the other part of this is, let's say that they do something big or something wild that changes the story. Like they they went to greet the prince, the mayor of a town, and it was just supposed to be a short meeting, and they full on like accuse him of something huge, even if you weren't planning on that, or they kidnap him or kill him or something, right? There's a lot of things that could go wrong in that scenario. And it's easy to be like, okay, oh man, they really messed up. Let's pounce on them. But think about it for a second. Wait for a second. Be like, okay, so you do this. And then give yourself a second to come up with a response, a good response. Because like I was saying, say less, but have it be more impactful. You can do that by sitting in the quiet and formulating what you think would be a very impactful response. So instead of the mayor being like, seize them, you could sit there and be like, okay, man, they just attacked the mayor. What could I do? And all this time, the players are just looking at you expectantly. And you're, instead of being like, oh, the first thing that comes to mind, be like, okay, so you attacked the mayor. Give me a sec. And then in that quiet, you're thinking and you're kind of visualizing the scene. And you're like, okay, the mayor's there. He's got a cut on his side. What would be really amazing? And then that could give you a moment for creativity. That's another aspect of this that I haven't mentioned so far. By giving yourself a moment of silence and actually visualizing and trying to think up a better response, you can come up with a more creative response. Instead of them just killing this helpless mayor, instead you kind of sit there thinking and you're like, oh my goodness, what if the mayor just reaches down to his side, looks at the blood, and kind of laughs a little? What would that mean? That would mean maybe he's very powerful. Maybe they've screwed up majorly, and whoever his boss is going to make life a living hell for them, right? If you give yourself time and you imagine things and you don't jump to the obvious answer that just fills the silence, you can be a lot more creative. Now, observation number 3. I think that saying less also keeps you from over-preparing. Many descriptions are just too meandering to really be impactful, right? You got to cut to the action. You got to cut to the points of interest. Instead of describing a valley from tip to toe, from butterflies to beetles, and back again, including the sound of the babbling brook and the smoke of a large town in the distance and all that jazz, right? You can reveal scenes in layers. You can kind of let things be a slow burn where you drip feed info to them and let it slowly paint out the picture. In fact, they'll be more curious because you gave them essentially so little to begin with. Like, instead of that lengthy description of a valley that the players step into, you could say something as simple as, you step out of the cave into a widening valley before you. Sparse foliage grows with grass here and there up to a lush forest just 100 feet in front of you. What do? So far they know that they stepped out of cave into a valley, and that, all of a sudden, going from where you are, it becomes a huge forest. That's one, it's very simple, but 2, it's also keeps things, it makes it so that they're more curious about where things are going. And guess what? You didn't have to prepare as much. Or rather, you didn't have to prepare to reveal so much. Once again, it's that kind of shadow dark principle of like, let them explore the dark corners that they're curious about. And that means you don't have to shine a light on all the other unexplored or unquestioned ones. And of course, I think that it means that each layer of the setting or the environment or the mystery you're presenting can kind of build up in their minds. Much like many good stories do, right? They don't dump exposition at the start. They slowly reveal it so that it's a more interesting reveal. Now, one of my cautions that I want to say at the end here is that while this is an important principle and one that I think all of us could benefit from practicing, it's not for all the time and it's not for every moment of every campaign. But I think it could help every campaign, to be clear. For example, at the start of a campaign, or when they enter an important area that you really want to describe, like a castle, city, or an entrance to a dungeon, or whatever, giving a little bit more description or painting more of a picture is totally justified, right? Unless, of course, part of it is mystery, at which point, revealing it layer by layer could be really interesting. But, if you think about some of the best actual plays out there, some of them dive right into the action. A lot of them take a second. I mean, heck, Critical Role being a great example of this, where they do a lot of setting the scene. And of course, Matt Mercer, he's always so great at that. And then Brendan Lee Mulligan, right? Same thing. But if you had that all the time, if they were always going into deep descriptions, then the campaign would turn into a slog. And it would also take a lot of freedom from the players themselves. So use it, be loquacious and long with your descriptions when you want. But for most of it, practicing brevity will serve you really well. So my challenge here is, it's kind of a twofold one. Practice by keeping yourself to responses and give your information in 2 to 3 sentences. Basically, set a goal for yourself in the next couple of campaigns to be like, you know what? I usually talk a lot. I'm going to kind of maybe even slow down your cadence as you mentally count in your head and be like, okay, I'm going to try and answer in 2 to 3 sentences. And I'm going to try and prompt them to the next step of the adventure in 2 to 3 sentences. Maybe even 1. And I think that you'll find that it makes you think a lot more about what you say. And I hope that it also teaches you to kind of sit in the quiet more, because that is one of the skills you're going to develop as part of this. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that it's something that not only improves your game, but also makes you feel less overburdened, less put upon to perform, to fill every moment, because you shouldn't have to. If you want a great story, great stories don't have to be long. Some of my favorite stories are short stories. Of course, I also love the long stories, but a lot of those long stories don't get overly wordy either in terms of how they describe things or anything like that. So yeah, I think that this will be very helpful, and please let us know how it turns out. But until next time, let's roll initiative.